The swarm came like a storm. The skies of the outer colonies burned as their endless ships poured through the void, blotting out the stars. On the bridge of Serenya's flagship, Ethan stood beside her, watching the invasion unfold. The maps showed hundreds of swarm vessels converging, their jagged shapes shifting and multiplying like shadows come alive. The alien generals spoke in harsh tones, voices full of fear and anger. "We cannot hold them. They are too many." Ethan clenched, his jaw. He had seen the swarm adapt to every trap, every trick. They were learning faster than anyone had believed possible. If they tried to fight ship against ship, they would be wiped out. "We can't beat them by matching force," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We have to strike their heart, their command core, whatever's holding this swarm together. Take that out and the rest will collapse," the generals muttered in disbelief. "It is madness. Their heart lies deep within the tide. To reach it would be death." Serenya's glowing eyes never left Ethan. "Then we will walk through death," she said calmly. The room fell silent. The Queen had spoken. Preparations began at once. Fleets were gathered, weapons armed, soldiers sworn to fight to the last. Ethan walked the decks, giving quiet encouragement to the crews. They still looked at him as an outsider, but now some nodded with respect. They had seen his ideas turn battles before. Maybe, just maybe, he could help them survive this one. Before the assault, Serenya called him to her private chamber. She stood without her crown, her armor dimmed, her face less queen and more woman. "This may be the end," she said quietly. Ethan forced a crooked smile. "If it is, at least we'll go out in style." But she did not smile. She stepped closer, her voice low. "You should not be here, Ethan. You are one life among billions. You should live." He shook his head. "If I walk away now, I'll be running forever, and I'm tired of running." He met her gaze steadily. "Besides, you need me. Someone has to remind you to fight dirty." For a long moment, she looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, she whispered his name again, softer than ever. "Ethan." When the time came, their fleet surged forward like sparks against the dark. The swarm swallowed them, a tide of black steel and fire. Ships vanished in bursts of light, screams echoing, cross comms. The void itself seemed to burn. Ethan sat at the tactical station beside Serenya, calling out maneuvers. "Split formation, pull them left, now drop mines." Explosions rippled through the swarm as traps detonated, tearing gaps in their formation. For a moment it worked, but the swarm adapted again, shifting like a living sea. Their numbers closed in. "We'll never reach the core like this," one general shouted. Ethan's mind raced. He saw the swarm closing around them, a trap within a trap, and then it hit him. "They want the Queen," he realized. "They're focusing on your ship. If they think you're here, they'll throw everything at you." Serenya turned to him sharply. "You suggest I become bait?" "Not you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing inside him. "Me." The chamber fell silent. "I'll take a decoy ship. Broadcast your command codes. They'll think they're chasing you. It'll draw their core fleet. Out of position, that's when you strike." The generals erupted in protest, but Serenya silenced them with a glare, her eyes locked on Ethan. "You will die." "Maybe," he admitted. "But if it gives you a chance to win, it's worth it." For a long heartbeat, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You are a fool." He grinned faintly. "Yeah, a very stubborn one." Minutes later, Ethan sat in the cockpit of a smaller vessel, controls glowing under his hands. He had flown ships before, but nothing like this. The system seemed alive, reacting to his touch. Serenya's voice came through the comm, calm and steady. "Ethan Reyes, do not make me regret this." "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, and launched into the storm. The swarm reacted instantly. Dozens of ships broke off, chasing the decoy. Ethan's craft shuddered under fire, shields flashing, alarms blaring. He gritted his teeth, swerving through debris, firing back with everything he had. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to laugh. "Come on, you ugly bastards. You want me? Come and get me. Behind him, the real fleet moved. Serenya's forces slipped through the gap, diving toward the swarm's core. Ethan's ship shook violently as enemy fire tore across the hull. Warnings screamed. He knew he couldn't last long, but he held the swarm's attention, dragging them further and further from their core. Finally, Serenya's voice came through, sharp and clear. We see it. Their heart. We strike now. The battle turned into chaos. Her fleet hurled everything at the swarm's core, breaking through layer after layer of defense. Explosions lit the void like a second sun. Ethan's vision blurred, smoke filling his cockpit. He knew he wouldn't make it out. Then her voice cut through again, fierce and unyielding. I will not let you fall. Through the haze, he saw her flagship dive into the fight, shields blazing, weapons carving a path toward him. She should have been striking the core. Instead, she was saving him. His comm crackled. Serenya, you'll miss your chance. I will not lose you, she said. Her ship swept between him and the swarm, shields taking the fire meant for him. Her crew pulled him aboard as his own vessel broke apart behind him. He stumbled onto her bridge, coughing, his vision swimming. She stood there, radiant and furious, gripping his arm as if she would never let go. You should have stayed back, he rasped. You should have lived, she answered. Together they turned back to the battle. With Ethan guiding her and Serenya commanding, the fleet made one final push. Their weapons struck the swarm's core. The monstrous heart shuddered, twisted, and finally collapsed in a burst of light that rippled through the entire tide. One by one, swarm ships fell still, their link severed, drifting lifeless into the void. Silence followed. For the first time in years, the stars were clear. On the bridge, cheers erupted. Soldiers wept, commanders embraced. But Ethan only stood, there staring at the fading light, barely able to believe it was over. Serenya turned to him. In front of her crew, in front of her nobles, she took his hand. Her voice carried through the silence. This human has saved us all. Remember his name, Ethan Reyes. The court would argue, the nobles would rage, but it did not matter. She had spoken. Later, when the noise had quieted and they stood alone, Ethan tried to joke again, his voice hoarse but steady. So, does this mean I outrank your generals now? For the first time, Serenya smiled fully, not faintly, not half-hidden, but with warmth that lit her entire face. She stepped closer, her voice soft. You outrank them all, and as the stars burned quietly beyond the glass, Ethan realized something. For once in his life, he wasn't living on borrowed time anymore. He had found something worth living for. Ethan did not sleep well that first night in the alien city. The chamber they gave him was large, carved from black stone, glowing veins of crystal running through the walls like rivers of light. It was beautiful in a strange way, but he couldn't forget the guards stationed outside, their weapons humming faintly through the silence. He sat on the strange bed, its surface too firm, his wrists still sore from the restraints they had used to drag him here. His mind replayed the moment again and again, the Queen's eyes, her calm voice, and the way she had said, "Too late." He had only joked, but her reply had carried weight, like she was declaring something more than amusement. It unsettled him. It fascinated him too, though he would never admit it out loud. The next morning, or what he guessed was morning in this underground city, 2 armored soldiers entered. They spoke in clipped tones, then gestured for him to follow. Ethan sighed, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Guest room service isn't a thing here. They led him through endless corridors filled with alien murals and living light, until they reached a wide chamber. At its center stood Queen Serenya. She was not seated on her throne this time. She stood tall, radiant in her living armor, surrounded by half a dozen nobles who looked as if they'd swallowed something sour the moment they saw Ethan. Human, Serenya said, her voice carrying through the chamber. You are here to be tested. Ethan frowned. Tested? Like an exam? Because if this involves algebra, I'm screwed. The Queen tilted her head, unbothered by his humor. You will show me the truth of your kind. weak, or worthy. The first trial was a debate. A noble with a long crest of shimmering spines stepped forward. He spoke in their alien tongue, but somehow the meaning reached Ethan's mind. Humans are parasites. They cannot live without stealing from others. They cannot create. They only consume. This one is proof. Ethan blinked. Wow. Harsh. He crossed his arms and thought for a moment. Then he answered, his words plain but firm. Humans survive because we adapt. We make mistakes, sure, but we learn from them. We don't give up. If we were only parasites, we would have died out long ago. We build, we grow, we keep moving forward. That's why I'm standing here right now. The nobles muttered angrily, but Serenya's eyes never left him. She seemed pleased. The second trial was physical. They brought him into a hall where warriors trained with long staffs that glowed with inner fire. A soldier twice his size stepped forward, weapon in hand. Ethan swallowed hard. He had never been much of a fighter, but running wasn't an option. When the duel began, the alien swung with brutal force. Ethan dodged clumsily, barely avoiding the strike. He grabbed a fallen staff and raised it, his arms shaking. He knew he couldn't match the alien in strength. But he didn't need to. He needed to be clever. Every time the warrior swung, Ethan sidestepped, letting the alien's momentum carry him forward. He stumbled, slipped, and at one point nearly fell flat on his face, but somehow he kept moving. Finally, in a desperate move, Ethan dropped low and jabbed the staff into the alien's knee. The warrior staggered, losing balance. Ethan quickly pressed the staff against the alien's chest, pinning him before he could recover. The hall went silent. Ethan stood there panting, sweat dripping down his face. He forced a grin. Guess clumsy beats strong sometimes. Serenya's lips curved faintly again, the smallest trace of approval. The third trial was not planned. It came that evening, when Ethan was escorted back to his chamber. He was walking between two guards when suddenly the glowstones in the hall dimmed and shadows moved. A cloaked figure leapt from above, blade flashing toward his throat. The guards reacted too slowly. Instinct screamed at Ethan, and he dropped to the floor. The blade missed his neck by inches. He grabbed a shard of broken crystal from the ground and swung wildly. The assassin hissed, stumbling back, but the strike gave the guards enough time to react. They tackled the figure, dragging him down. Ethan sat on the cold floor, his heart racing. He stared at the blood-red smear the blade had left across the stone where his head should have been. Later, he stood once more before Serenya. The assassin lay dead at her feet, executed without ceremony. The queen's voice was colder now, but her eyes burned with intensity. They will kill you if they can, because I protect you. Ethan rubbed his wrist nervously. I didn't ask for protection. You earned it, she said simply. Then softer, almost to herself. And I will not allow them to take what is mine. Her words sent a chill through him. He wanted to protest, to remind her he wasn't a thing to be claimed. But when he met her gaze, he found himself silent. That night, lying awake in his chamber, Ethan realized something dangerous. The queen wasn't only testing him, she was claiming him. And in this city of shadows and whispers, that claim might be the most dangerous protection of all. Ethan had always thought of himself as a man who lived on borrowed time. Crashing on this alien world had only confirmed that. But after the assassination attempt, he realized that time was running shorter than ever. Every step he took through the alien city was shadowed by whispers, hostile stares, and the feeling of eyes watching from every corner. The guards followed him everywhere now. At first he thought it was for his safety. But as he studied their expressions, cold and resentful, he realized they were not there to protect him. They were there to watch him, to remind him he did not belong. The queen had summoned him to her private hall after the attack. He entered cautiously, still shaken by how close the blade had come to his throat. Serenya stood near a wide balcony of glowing crystal, her figure outlined against the strange skies beyond. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply looked out over her empire, as if it were a burden she carried on her shoulders. You almost died? she said finally, her voice low but sharp. Ethan gave a weak laugh. Yeah, I noticed. He rubbed his neck, still feeling the phantom trace of the assassin's blade. Thanks for the save, by the way. She turned to him, eyes glowing, faintly in the dim light. I cannot protect you from them all. My court believes you are a danger to me. They whisper that I am compromised. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Compromised? All because I cracked a few jokes and didn't die when your warrior tried to knock my head off? Serenia stepped closer, studying him. You do not fear as they expect. You speak when you should remain silent. You fight when you should surrender. You survive when you should fall. These are not traits they respect, but they are traits I cannot ignore. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but she lifted a hand, silencing him. Her voice softened. There is something you must know. You are not the first human to walk these halls. That caught him off guard. Wait, what? There were others? Long ago, she said. Explorers, strays. They did not last. Some were executed, others vanished. None of them stood before me as you do now. Ethan swallowed. A knot formed in his stomach. If others had come before him and none had survived, then maybe he was only delaying the inevitable. Still, a part of him was stubborn enough to push back. Maybe they just didn't have my charm. Her lips curved faintly, that rare, almost smile he had seen before. But then her expression hardened. There is more. You were brought here because I chose it. Not because I feared you, but because I need you. That stunned him into silence. Need me? Why? Serenia gestured toward the balcony. Because the war that comes will not be won with strength alone, she explained then. She spoke of the swarm, machines born from ancient war, self-replicating, consuming everything in their path. They stripped worlds bare, turning living matter into metal husks. Entire systems had fallen already. Her empire was stretched thin, fighting to hold the line. And now the swarm was moving closer, faster than her fleets could respond. Ethan listened, his chest tightening. He had heard of machine intelligence in old stories, in training manuals that spoke of long-dead threats. But this was no story. This was real. And you think I can help with that? He asked quietly. You think differently, Serenia said simply. Your people fight not with strength but with cunning. You survive by bending rules, by using what you should not. My generals do not understand this, but I have seen it in you. When you fought my warrior, when you evaded the assassin, you turned weakness into advantage. That is what we will need. Ethan leaned against the railing, staring at the glowing city below. His thoughts spun. He was just an engineer, not a soldier, not a strategist. But maybe she was right. Humans had always survived by improvising, by turning the impossible into something possible. You know, he said slowly. On Earth, we used to say the best weapon we had wasn't our guns or ships. It was our stubbornness. We don't quit. Sometimes we don't even know how. Serenia's gaze softened, her glowing eyes reflecting the strange light of the city. Yes, she whispered. That is why I chose you. For a long moment they stood there silent, two figures from different worlds bound by a war neither had wanted. Ethan felt something stir in his chest, something he tried to push down. He couldn't afford to feel anything for her. She was a queen, an alien, a force far beyond him. And yet when she looked at him that way, he couldn't shake the thought that she understood him more than anyone ever had. The next days were filled with tension. Serenia brought him into her council chamber, where alien generals glared and hissed at his presence. They demanded his removal, calling him a liability. Serenia silenced them with a single raised hand. He stays, she said. You will listen. Ethan stood awkwardly at the edge of the grand table, surrounded by warriors and nobles who could crush him with a single blow. Maps of star systems shimmered in the air, showing the swarm's advance. He listened, trying to make sense of their rigid strategies, their obsession with direct confrontation. Finally, when the silence grew unbearable, Ethan cleared his throat. If I can say something, you're fighting them on their terms. Big fleets, big battles. Machines love that. They adapt, they copy. You need to think smaller. Strike where they don't expect, hit their supply lines, confuse them, make them chase shadows. The generals erupted in outrage. "This is dishonor," one shouted. "We do not fight like cowards." Ethan held his ground even as his hands shook. "You fight with honor and you'll lose. I've seen it before. You want to win? Stop giving them what they want." The chamber fell into chaos, voices overlapping. But Serenya's voice cut through it all. "Enough. He speaks truth." Her words silenced the room. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing he had just stepped deeper into a storm. That night, Serenya spoke to him again in private. She confessed her doubts, her fears that her empire was crumbling. For the first time, Ethan saw not the queen but the woman beneath, the weight she carried, the loneliness of command. And without thinking, he spoke honestly. "You don't have to do it alone." The way she looked at him then made his chest ache. For a moment, the walls between them seemed thinner, but before anything more could be said, the alarm bells rang. A harsh vibration shook the city, echoing through the stone walls. Soldiers rushed through the corridors, shouting in panic. Ethan looked to Serenya, his stomach sinking. "What is it?" Her expression was grim. "They are here." And as the sky above the alien city turned red with burning trails, Ethan realized the swarm had arrived at last. The night sky burned with fire. Ethan stood on the balcony beside Queen Serenya, watching as glowing streaks cut across the heavens. The swarm had arrived. The alien city, usually humming with a low, steady energy, now shook with alarms. Soldiers rushed through the streets, war machines awakened from their resting places, and the air vibrated with a single word spoken in a dozen tongues: war. Ethan's stomach twisted as he saw the enemy for the first time. The swarm ships were not like anything he had seen before. They were not sleek or elegant like human craft, nor grand and proud like Serenya's fleets. They were jagged masses of shifting metal, like living nightmares crawling across the stars. They didn't move in formation. They moved like a tide, endless and relentless. Serenya's voice was calm, though her glowing eyes betrayed the storm within her. "They will test us first. Small strikes. Then the tide will fall." Ethan swallowed hard. "And when it does?" She looked at him. "Then we fight until we cannot." That answer might have satisfied her generals, but not Ethan. He had seen the maps, the swarm's numbers. A straight fight would only end one way. Hours later, he found himself in the council chamber again, surrounded by nobles and generals who still looked at him as if he were a disease. Holograms filled the room, showing swarm ships approaching the border outposts. The generals shouted over one another, arguing about where to send fleets, how to hold ground. Ethan finally slammed his hand on the table. "You're all thinking too big. You're trying to match them strength for strength. That's suicide. You have to think smaller. Hit them where it hurts when they're not looking. Make them chase you instead of the other way around." The room erupted again, voices full of outrage. "Dishonor," one shouted. "Cowards' tactics," another hissed. Ethan's pulse raced, but he didn't back down. "You think they care about your honor? They don't. They're machines. They don't feel pride, they don't fear shame. The only thing they care about is winning. If you fight them on their terms, you're already dead." The shouting grew louder until Serenya stood. Her voice thundered through the chamber, silencing all. "Enough. We will hear him." The generals glared but obeyed. Ethan stepped forward, nerves knotting his stomach, but he forced the words out. "Set traps. Break your fleets into smaller groups. Use decoys. Make them waste resources chasing shadows. And when they're spread too thin, hit them hard where it matters. On Earth we call it guerrilla warfare. It's how the weak fight the strong and win." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Serenya nodded. "So be it. We will test the human strategy." That night, Ethan rowed aboard one of Serenya's warships for the first time. It was nothing like the cramped human craft he had trained in years ago. Her ships were alive, their walls pulsing with faint light, their controls responding almost like muscle and bone. The crew treated him with cold suspicion, but none dared disobey Serenya's command to give him access. From the bridge they watched as smaller strike teams peeled away, slipping into the swarm's path. Ethan's plan was risky. Send small, fast ships to bait the machines into pursuit, then lure them into kill zones where larger fleets lay waiting in ambush. When the first ambush worked, the entire bridge erupted in shock. A swarm cluster, caught off guard, was destroyed with minimal losses. Ethan let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. See? They're not invincible, you just have to fight dirty. Some of the crew still looked uneasy, but others began to glance at him with something that might have been respect. Serenya's gaze never left him, calm and steady, but there was something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Days blurred into battles. Ethan became more than a guest. He became a strategist at Serenya's side. He walked the decks, teaching alien commanders tricks humans had used for centuries: feints, false retreats, hidden mines. Slowly, victories began to pile up. Small ones, but victories all the same. One battle nearly cost him his life. A swarm boarding party broke through the hull during a skirmish. Ethan found himself face to face with a machine that looked like a twisted insect, its claws dripping with molten light. He had no weapon but a maintenance tool, but he swung it anyway, sparks flying. The creature lunged, and he was certain he would die, until Serenya herself cut it down, her blade singing through the air. When the battle was over, Ethan stood shaking, his hand still clutching the useless tool. Serenya looked at him, her voice steady. "Why did you not flee?" He forced a weak grin. "Guess I wanted to impress you." Her glowing eyes softened, and for the first time she said his name, not just human. "Ethan, do not waste yourself." Something in the way she said it made his throat tighten. The bond between them deepened with every battle. They spent long nights in the command chamber, bent over maps, speaking quietly while the stars burned outside. Ethan found himself telling her stories of Earth, how his people had survived wars, disasters, near extinction. Serenya listened, not with the distant curiosity of a ruler, but with genuine interest. Sometimes, when the chamber was quiet, she shared her own fears, how heavy the crown felt, how much it cost her to lead a people who saw her as untouchable. One night, exhausted after a long skirmish, Ethan repeated the joke that had started it all. "Careful," he said, his voice low and tired. "You're falling in love with me." This time Serenya did not pause, did not weigh the words. She looked straight at him, her eyes glowing softly. It was never a fall. It was a choice. The word struck him harder than any battle. For a moment he forgot the war, the swarm, the danger. All he saw was her, but the universe never allowed peace for long. The swarm adapted. Their endless ships began to change, responding to the traps, avoiding the ambushes. Ethan's tricks worked less and less each day. Victories turned into stalemates, stalemates into losses. The tide was shifting back. On the bridge of her flagship, Ethan stared at the latest reports, his stomach sinking. The swarm had found a way to pierce the Empire's defenses. Whole systems were falling. Serenya stood beside him, her face calm but her eyes grim. "They are learning," she said. Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we need something bigger, something they won't expect." Serenya turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "Then, we will make our stand, one last strike at the heart of their fleet." Ethan met her gaze. He knew what she was asking, and he knew it might cost him everything. But looking into her eyes, he also knew he could not refuse. "Then let's do it," he said. The bridge shook as alarms rang again. The swarm was breaking through the final line. The last battle was coming. And as Ethan gripped the rail, the thought struck him cold. This might be the end of both their worlds. Ethan Reyes had always imagined space travel as a grand adventure. Growing up on Earth, he would watch the launch feeds, the documentaries, the hollow advertisements that promised humanity's future among the stars. But reality was rarely what the glossy brochures suggested. By the time his shuttle broke apart in orbit and went spiraling into the atmosphere of a world no one had even catalogued properly. Ethan had already learned the truth. The universe didn't care about human dreams. It didn't care about promises either. It only cared about survival. The crash was violent enough to knock the breath out of him and tear apart half the instruments on board. When Ethan crawled out of the twisted hull, his body sore and his ribs aching, he realized he had somehow cheated death again. He didn't know how long the oxygen tanks would last, and he didn't know if there was anything here that could kill him in the next few hours. He only knew he was alive, and being alive meant trying. The sky of this world was painted in strange colors, streaks of violet and deep copper that reminded him of oil floating on water. The air carried a metallic taste, and the ground was rough, with black stone and glowing moss that pulsed faintly like embers under ash. The silence pressed down on him, broken only by the distant crackle of his damaged radio. Ethan scavenged quickly, pulling out the emergency pack, a flare gun, a knife, and a few rations that had survived the impact. He muttered to himself, as he often did when nerves clawed at him, "Well, Reyes, looks like you found the one travel destination that wasn't in the brochure." He thought he was alone. He wasn't. They found him before nightfall. Shadows moved across the ridge, tall figures draped in armor that seemed alive, glowing with pale threads that pulsed like veins. They didn't speak in a language he understood, but their gestures were clear. The weapons they carried hummed with restrained power. Ethan lifted his hands slowly, trying to look harmless, though his heart hammered against his chest. "I come in peace," he muttered, not expecting them to understand. They didn't. They bound his hands with glowing restraints that tingled against his skin, and they led him away. The alien city was nothing like he had imagined. It wasn't metal and glass towers reaching into the sky. It was carved into the living stone itself, glowing veins of crystal lighting vast caverns where structures grew like roots and spires. Strange creatures fluttered in the air, some mechanical, some organic, and he couldn't tell which was which. The air was filled with a faint vibration, like music that came from the ground itself. The aliens pushed him through this city of wonders and nightmares until they reached the largest chamber of all, where a throne of dark crystal rose in the center. And there she was, the queen. Even among these beings, she stood apart. Her form was tall, elegant, armored with living plates that shimmered like a storm of stars. Her eyes glowed with an inner fire, a deep sapphire light that seemed to cut through him. She didn't move at first. She simply studied him, and Ethan felt the weight of that gaze like gravity pulling at his soul. He was used to superiors sizing him up, used to commanders judging if he was worth their time, but this was something more. It felt as though she could see not just his face, but the entire thread of his life stretched out before her. The guards forced him to his knees. Ethan, stubborn as always, refused to bow fully. His knees hit the ground, but his back stayed straight. He looked up at her, bruised, dirty, exhausted, and he forced himself to smile. "So," he said dryly, "I'm guessing you're not the welcoming committee." A murmur swept the chamber. He had no idea what they were saying, but he could tell his words had caused ripples. The queen tilted her head, a small movement that nevertheless silenced the room. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, resonant, echoing not only in the air but somehow in his bones. He didn't understand the words, yet his mind seemed to twist around them, pulling meaning from sound. "You are human." Ethan blinked. "You know us?" "Stories," she said, "fragments, weak creatures, fragile, yet dangerous in ways not understood." He chuckled nervously. "Dangerous? Me? Lady, the only thing I'm dangerous to is a buffet." The chamber stayed utterly still. The queen did not laugh. She studied him as though she were measuring the weight of every syllable. And then, for the first time, something flickered across her expression. Not anger, not disdain. Curiosity. Ethan, unable to resist pushing boundaries even when survival depended on silence, leaned slightly forward. "Careful," he said, forcing a grin despite the pounding of his heart. "You're falling in love with me." The guard stiffened. Some raised their weapons as if prepared to strike him down for insolence. The chamber felt as if the air had frozen solid. Ethan realized belatedly that maybe he'd taken his joke too far. His mouth went dry. But the queen did not order his execution. She did not look insulted. She did not even glance at her guards. Instead, her gaze sharpened, locked on him as if she were seeing him for the first time, not as a curiosity, not as a fragile intruder, but as something else entirely. Her lips curved, the faintest trace of a smile, or perhaps a warning. "Too late," she said. The words dropped into the silence like stones into a well, rippling through every figure in the... From Ethan's breath caught. He had been ready for many things, mockery, punishment, even death, but not that. Certainly not that. The chamber stirred again, voices rising in alarm and disbelief, but Ethan barely heard them. He was still locked in her gaze, still trying to process the weight of her words. Too late. And for the first time since he had crashed on this alien world, Ethan Reyes felt something stronger than fear. He felt the cold thrill of knowing his life had just become much, much more complicated.